The hearing room in Capitol Hill didn't look special that morning. Same chairs, same water pitchers, same crisp white nameplates. But the energy? That was different. You could feel it, static, humming, almost vibrating beneath the surface. At 10:03 a.m., the Committee on Educational Equity and Federal Oversight was called to order. C-SPAN was live. Staffers lined the back wall, eyes bouncing between phones and the witness table. Microphones blinked red. Cameras rolled. And two women, Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt, sat across from each other, silently bracing for what both knew was coming. Jasmine, dressed in a cobalt blue blazer that contrasted sharply with the mahogany wood around her, reviewed her annotated packet one last time. She'd flown in from Dallas late the night before. Barely slept. But that wasn't new. She was used to being tired. What she wasn't used to, what she would never get used to, was being disrespected on public record. And she had a feeling today would test that in ways she hadn't seen before. Karoline Leavitt, once a conservative TV darling, now one of the youngest and loudest Republican strategists on the Hill, sat 2 chairs to the left. She wore ivory, as usual, sharp, styled, unbothered. A smile sat just behind her lips like a switchblade in a silk sheath. She didn't look up, not yet. The topic was supposed to be education, specifically, federal failures to fund underserved districts. But everyone knew what it really was, a proxy war. Old America versus new. Heritage versus justice. And 2 women, black and white, were about to become the faces of that battle. Chairman Rutherford cleared his throat. We welcome Representative Crockett from Texas to offer opening remarks. You have 5 minutes. Jasmine turned on her mic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she began, her voice firm but controlled. Let's talk about facts. Let's talk about numbers. But more importantly, let's talk about the children behind them. The room settled. I represent a district where kids still share torn-up textbooks from 2004. Where teachers pay for their own paper. Where the paint chips off the ceilings, and the pipes run brown for 3 days before anyone notices. She paused. But what's worse? When we bring these issues to this chamber, instead of solutions, we get dismissed. Lectured. Interrupted. Karoline shifted slightly. No eye contact yet, but her fingers tapped once on the table. Jasmine continued. Today I'm not just speaking for my district. I'm speaking for every kid in this country who walks into a school building and doesn't see opportunity, only survival. That's when it happened. Karoline leaned forward, not waiting her turn. Representative Crockett, if I may. Jasmine didn't flinch. I'll yield the floor when I'm finished, Ms. Leavitt. A flicker of tension rippled. The chairman raised an eyebrow. Let her proceed, please. Karoline smiled, tight, calculated. And leaned back. That was interruption number 1. Nobody knew then it would be the first of 7. But Jasmine knew. She felt it in her bones. This wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be an ambush in heels and headlines. And she was ready. Karoline Leavitt didn't need permission to interrupt. She was bred in a political ecosystem where being loud was synonymous with being right, and being white meant never having to apologize for either. As Jasmine continued her statement, Karoline's eyes stayed fixed, sharp, narrowed, calculating. She wasn't listening. She was loading. I want to be clear, Jasmine said, her voice unwavering, no child's potential should be determined by their zip code. Yet time and again, we see the same districts underfunded, under-resourced, and under attack. Karoline leaned forward again. And yet, they're also the same districts mismanaged by liberal leadership for decades, Congresswoman. You keep blaming the system, maybe you should look at who's been running it. That was interruption number 2. Jasmine turned her head. Calm. Controlled. But her eyes made contact now. Ms. Leavitt, she said, you'll have your turn. I've had mine taken too many times in rooms like this. A low murmur passed through the gallery. The chairman looked annoyed. Ms. Leavitt, let the witness proceed. Karoline shrugged and smiled, saccharine and smug. Just keeping her honest. Jasmine inhaled, then pressed on. Let me walk you through the numbers. In my district, 78% of students are on free or reduced lunch. The average classroom has 32 students, 1 teacher, and 0 mental health professionals. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for equal footing. As Jasmine flipped to the next page of her prepared remarks, Karoline scoffed into her mic. Just loud enough. Maybe if they spent less on equity consultants and more on reading comprehension. Interruption number 3. Jasmine didn't look up this time. Instead, she paused, closed her folder gently, and rested her hands on the table. She knew this game. Let them keep poking. They'd mistake silence for surrender, until it wasn't. Ms. Leavitt, she said without turning her head, I assume you read the Department of Education's latest audit? Karoline blinked. Because it shows that federal funding disparities are widest in districts where schools serve predominantly students of color. That's not an equity consultant. That's a reality check. There was a beat of silence. And then Karoline grinned like she was waiting for the punchline. Well, she replied, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear, maybe if parents were more involved instead of relying on government handouts. Interruption number 4. This time, the chairman didn't say anything. Neither did Jasmine. She just sat still, watching Karoline's words bounce off the walls and die somewhere in the carpet. The hearing room felt tighter now. The air, less oxygen and more friction. People were leaning forward. Staffers stopped typing. Reporters adjusted camera focus. Everyone knew something was building. And Karoline? She still thought she was winning. Still thought her interruptions were control. But she hadn't noticed something crucial. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice once. And she wasn't going to. Not until it mattered. By the time interruption 5 came, Jasmine hadn't moved a muscle. She sat with her spine straight, hands lightly folded, eyes steady on the paper in front of her. Not reading anymore. Just waiting. Watching. Calculating. She wasn't reacting. She was preserving. Because when you grow up in rooms that don't expect you to speak, you learn quickly, your silence is a weapon. And when you do speak, it better land like a brick through glass. Karoline, meanwhile, was unraveling in reverse. She looked polished, yes, blonde, confident, assertive. But underneath, her words were turning frantic. She didn't understand why her jabs weren't landing. She didn't expect this much stillness from someone like Jasmine. She wanted fire, emotion, something she could paint as angry black woman rhetoric for social media soundbites. Instead, she got the opposite. After Jasmine's last comment about Department of Education audits, Karoline leaned into her mic again with a smug scoff. You're cherry-picking data to play the victim card. Typical. Interruption 5. A gasp escaped someone near the back. Jasmine finally looked up. Not angry. Not surprised. Just, ready. She spoke slowly now, and the whole room leaned in, because when someone speaks that softly in a room built for shouting, you don't miss a word. Victim card, she said. Let me tell you what a real victim looks like. She reached into her folder again, not for a report, but for a photograph. She slid it across the desk, directly in front of her. It was a boy. Brown-skinned. 3rd grade. Head resting on a textbook. Shoes torn at the heel. Backpack duct taped together. His name is Darnell, Jasmine said. 8 years old. Missed 24 school days last semester because the bus route in his neighborhood was cut. Why? Budget realignment. Karoline shifted. Her smile faltered for a beat. And when he did make it to school, Jasmine continued, there was no breakfast. No working heater in December. But sure. Let's talk about victimhood like it's a performance. Silence. Heavy. Full. Karoline opened her mouth. Excuse me, she said. But anecdotes aren't policy. Interruption 6. This time, she wasn't confident. She was trying to reassert control. But it was too late. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she turned fully toward her. Not to debate. To expose. Do you know what Darnell's mother told me? She said. She said, I can work 2 jobs, but I can't build a school out of nothing. I can't fix a system that wasn't built for my son. Karoline scoffed again, interruption 7, but the noise barely registered now. The room had moved on. The tension wasn't between the 2 women anymore. It was between the people watching, those who recognized Darnell in their own communities, and those still trying not to. Chairman Rutherford leaned forward, mouth half open, as if to restore order. But Jasmine beat him to it. She turned her mic off. Then sat back. Not because she was finished. But because the silence she left behind had more volume than anything Karoline had managed all morning. And everyone felt it. For a moment, no one moved. Jasmine's mic was off, but the air around her was louder than any words Karoline had spoken. She hadn't flinched, hadn't shouted, hadn't even raised her brow, but the weight of what she laid on the table was undeniable. That photo of Darnell, quiet and ordinary, had landed like thunder. Karoline sat back, crossing her arms. She had planned for confrontation, not for stillness. And certainly not for truth wrapped in grace. The chairman cleared his throat, finally breaking the tension. We will now allow time for panel questions. Karoline's name was called first. She didn't wait for a nod. Representative Crockett, she began, her voice too smooth to be sincere, you say your district suffers from systemic inequity, but let's be honest, those conditions didn't appear overnight. Maybe if local leaders focused more on academic standards and less on wokeness. Jasmine turned her mic back on with a slow click. I'll stop you there. The shift in tone was immediate. Controlled, yet final. You don't get to say, let's be honest, if you're not ready to be. Karoline blinked. You mentioned academic standards? Let's talk about that, Jasmine continued, voice unwavering. Texas ranks 45th in per pupil spending. You think that's because we're too focused on pronouns? The room let out a collective inhale. Karoline opened her mouth, but Jasmine kept going. I have constituents who drive 40 minutes to access a Wi-Fi signal so their kids can submit homework. Teachers paying for printers out of pocket. Students sitting in classrooms with mold on the ceilings and mice under the desks. But sure, let's blame wokeness. That's easier than confronting the truth. Karoline attempted to interject, but Jasmine was fully in control now. The rhythm, the pace, the tone, everything shifted. Let me ask you something, Ms. Leavitt, she said, leaning forward, have you ever sat in a classroom where the fire alarm doesn't work? Where the AC fails in August? Where the textbooks still list George W. Bush as president? Karoline didn't respond. And for the first time, she didn't look like she had one ready. Because I have, Jasmine said, her voice softer now. And that's why I fight. Not for sound bites. Not for platforms. But for the people who are too exhausted to fight for themselves. She paused. And this time, it wasn't for effect. It was for respect. For space. For breath. Then she added, with a tone sharper than any shout. You interrupted me 7 times. And not once did you land a point. That sentence hit like glass shattering. Not a yell. Not a threat. Just precision. Dead center. Even the chairman leaned back in his chair. Karoline stared forward, jaw locked. Her confidence, once weaponized, was now muted. And in that silence, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, not victorious, but grounded. Because this wasn't about winning a round. It was about reclaiming the room. Somewhere in the back of the room, a congressional aide scribbled furiously into a legal pad, underlining one phrase: "You interrupted me 7 times. And not once did you land a point." That line would be replayed later. On cable news. On social media. In college classrooms. But in this moment, it lived in the silence Karoline Leavitt didn't know how to fill. She sat with her fingers clutched tightly around her pen, her lips parted but unmoving. Her prepared remarks suddenly felt like paper in a storm, irrelevant, flimsy, unmoored. Chairman Rutherford cleared his throat again, but even he hesitated to pivot. "Representative Crockett," he said cautiously, "if you'd like to continue your comments." "I'm done," Jasmine replied. And she was. Because anything more would have been indulgent. She hadn't come to destroy. She'd come to reveal. But the room? The room still hadn't exhaled. Karoline shuffled her notes, fumbling for footing. Then, with a voice that tried too hard to sound composed, she leaned forward and said, "It's clear Representative Crockett has strong feelings, but strong feelings don't fix broken schools." There it was again. That old tactic. Minimize. Redirect. Accuse without appearing hostile. Jasmine didn't respond. Not with words. She simply tilted her head ever so slightly, like someone watching a chess opponent make a doomed move 2 turns too late. Karoline tried again. "What we need are measurable outcomes, not moral outrage." A few reporters raised eyebrows. They'd seen this move before. Karoline wasn't speaking to the room anymore, she was speaking to a future clip, a future headline, a future panel discussion hosted by people who'd never taught in a failing school. But Jasmine? She was still speaking to the present. And that's when she reached once more into her folder. She pulled out a single page. Held it up. "This," she said, "is a letter from a teacher in my district who's worked 23 years without a single raise that matched inflation. She teaches history, but lately, she told me, she feels like she's living through it again." She turned to the chairman. "May I read a portion?" He nodded. She began. "They say our kids are failing, but they never ask who failed them first. We lost 2 students to gun violence last year. The school counselor quit because she couldn't handle 400 cases. I still grade papers until midnight. My window's cracked, my chalkboard's older than my students' parents, and I'm still expected to make miracles." Jasmine paused. Folded the letter. Then she looked directly at Karoline. "No one here is afraid of outcomes, Ms. Leavitt. We're afraid of excuses dressed up as critique. You say feelings won't fix anything, but feelings are what these kids are left with when policy forgets them. A beat. You wouldn't last one day in my district." That wasn't bravado. It was a dare. One wrapped in exhaustion, truth, and the unspoken question, what do you actually know about the people you dismiss so easily? Karoline's mouth twitched. But no sound came. Because now she understood. This wasn't a policy war. This was a reckoning. And Jasmine hadn't just broken the room. She'd rebuilt who it belonged to. By now, the balance of the hearing had shifted completely. Karoline wasn't just off script, she was off rhythm. Her face still bore the practiced confidence of a rising political star, but her words were stalling behind her thoughts. Her eyes darted toward Chairman Rutherford, then the clock, then the cameras. She was searching, for time, for favor, for an exit. Jasmine, on the other hand, wasn't searching for anything. She'd already found the center of the room and held it without force. Not because she demanded it. Because she earned it. Let's talk about outcomes, Jasmine said again, but this time to the room, not just to Karoline. Since my colleague is so interested. She turned a page in her binder and read. 30% of schools in low-income urban districts fail to meet federal standards for infrastructure. 42% have HVAC systems classified as outdated or hazardous. Meanwhile, those same districts report a dropout rate of over 20%, not because students are lazy, but because they're working overnight to keep the lights on at home. She looked up. These are outcomes. Measurable, charted, and funded, or not. Karoline jumped in, desperate to interrupt. Correlation isn't causation, representative. Maybe if students had better parenting, more discipline. A sharp inhale pulsed across the room. Even the chairman tensed. Jasmine didn't speak. Not right away. She looked at Karoline, not with anger, but with a gaze that could have stopped time. Did you just blame underperformance on parenting? Jasmine asked, voice low, deliberate. Is that the new policy framework? Discipline over desks? Shame over school lunches? Karoline tried to correct. That's not what I said. But it's what you meant, Jasmine snapped back. And that's the problem with your entire approach. You walk into spaces you don't understand, assume failure is a character flaw, then frame the solution as control. The gallery was still. Frozen. Let me tell you something, Jasmine continued. My mother raised 3 kids working minimum wage. You think she didn't believe in discipline? She had more structure in our 1-bedroom apartment than some entire school boards manage with millions. Karoline leaned back. The performative poise had cracked now. Just enough to show she was human, but too late to wield it as power. And by the way, Jasmine added, discipline doesn't fix mold. It doesn't make heat appear in January. It doesn't print new textbooks or uncancel a bus route. She leaned forward, tapping her fingers once against the desk. You want results? Start funding solutions. Not slogans. The impact of her words wasn't in the volume, but in the vibration. They hummed through the room like a second heartbeat. Reporters were typing furiously. A C-SPAN producer near the back whispered, "We've got a headline." But Jasmine wasn't finished. She slid another sheet across the desk. A graph this time. Color-coded. Stark. Red is underfunded districts, she said. Yellow is teacher shortages. Blue is average class size. She paused. There is no green. No one blinked. Because that line? That was the gut punch. The quiet killer. There is no green. No safe zone. No storybook ending for the students Jasmine fought for every day. And Karoline, suddenly small behind her makeup and her carefully selected blazer, finally understood what the rest of the room had realized 10 minutes ago. She didn't lose the argument. She lost the audience. Karoline shifted in her chair, but Jasmine didn't wait. You came in here with stats someone pulled off a blog, she said, tone flat but fierce. I came with receipts. I came with names. She tapped her binder again. Like Maya Jefferson. 15. Top of her class. Lives in a 1-bedroom apartment with 3 siblings. Studies in the hallway while her mom works night shifts. Still scored in the 92nd percentile on her SAT. Jasmine glanced up. You think she needs discipline? Or a desk that doesn't wobble? Karoline swallowed, but Jasmine didn't give space for recovery. You don't fix policy failures with shame. You fix them with funding. With intention. With the courage to stop blaming the people living under the weight of bad decisions made by people like you. The jab wasn't loud, but it hit hard. Because it wasn't just about Karoline, it was about the whole machine. Karoline tried again, her voice thinner now. So you're saying we should just keep throwing money? Jasmine cut her off, calm but cold. No. I'm saying stop throwing blame. Her hand hovered over the microphone. You've interrupted me 7 times today. And I let it slide. But let me be real clear, I won't sit silent while you turn my community into a punchline. She looked directly into Karoline's eyes. We've bled enough for other people's political theater. A hush settled over the room like a heavy coat. Cameras zoomed in. One aide stopped mid-text. The C-SPAN feed's chat exploded in real time. She's not backing down. That part. She's surgical. Jasmine inhaled slowly. The truth is, she said, voice steady, you don't know these neighborhoods. You've never walked through a hallway that smells like mildew. You've never had to choose between fixing a radiator and paying rent. You've never watched a kid cry because the bus left early and his mom couldn't leave work to pick him up. Her voice dipped. But I have. She reached into her folder again. Pulled out a photograph, worn, slightly faded. This is a school in my district. Roof caved in last spring. Kids were relocated to a gymnasium for 6 months. No walls. No doors. Just dividers and prayers. She held it up to the cameras. That's not failure. That's survival. Jasmine turned back toward Karoline. And you don't get to critique survival when all you've ever known is comfort. This time, Karoline didn't speak. Couldn't. Her jaw was tight, her fingers still, her argument dissolved. Because in front of her was something she couldn't outspin, out-talk, or out-clapback, lived experience. Jasmine placed the photo down. You don't have to like how I say it. You don't even have to like me. But you're going to respect what I represent. Her voice had no tremble. Because whether it's Maya or Miss Leona or the kids in that gym, they don't need your permission to deserve better. They already do. And with that, she leaned back. Quiet. Centered. Whole. Across the room, someone whispered, she just ended her without raising her voice. And outside that hearing, the world was already watching. Karoline sat frozen, politely, properly, perfectly still. But everyone watching knew the moment had turned. The camera didn't need to zoom in to catch the crack. It was in her eyes. In the shallow breath. In the silence of someone who knew she'd lost not just a moment, but the narrative. Jasmine hadn't come to debate numbers. She'd come to expose the gap between those who use statistics and those who survive them. You want to talk metrics? Jasmine continued, her voice like a calm storm. Let's measure how many public housing units are beyond repair. Let's count how many students can't access Wi-Fi in 2025. Let's ask how many communities are forced to choose between water pressure and heat. She turned toward the rest of the panel. But let's also count this, how many times we show up here and hear the same excuses dressed up in different blazers. That's the real repetition problem. A quiet ripple of acknowledgement passed through the room. It wasn't applause, it was something heavier. Truth landing. No one said it, but they felt it. This wasn't a clapback. This was an audit. Not of Karoline, but of the system that produced Karoline's argument. Karoline finally spoke, voice softer now. I respect your passion, representative, but, Jasmine raised a finger. Just one. Not to silence, but to signal. Enough. Don't condescend to me with passion. Her tone didn't rise, but it firmed. What you call passion is what happens when people are tired of being statistics in someone else's speech. She turned to Chairman Rutherford. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the rest of my time, unless, of course, Ms. Leavitt would like to interrupt one more time. A few muffled laughs broke in the gallery. Not disrespectful, just relieved. The kind of laugh people let out when someone finally says what they've been screaming in their heads. Rutherford blinked, caught between protocol and awe. You may proceed, he said. But Jasmine didn't. She'd already said everything that needed to be said. And now the hearing had shifted from noise to memory. The phrase, 7 interruptions, 0 impact, was already trending on social media. Not because it was catchy, but because it captured what millions had seen for years, people like Karoline mistaking volume for vision, interruption for insight, and critique for contribution. In the hallway outside, reporters clustered in circles. Some whispering. Some recording. Inside, Karoline stared down at her own notes like they belonged to someone else. Because they did. They belonged to the version of her that thought experience could be out-talked. Jasmine gathered her papers slowly. Purposefully. She didn't rush. She didn't smirk. She didn't even glance back. She'd come in with truth. And left with the room. The footage from the hearing didn't need editing. It went viral raw, no music, no jump cuts, no text overlays. Just Jasmine Crockett, eyes steady, voice firm, dismantling the kind of political theater that usually dominates rooms like that. Within 2 hours, clips were circulating on every major platform. One Twitter thread, posted by a political science professor, dissected all 7 interruptions from Karoline. Another user clipped Jasmine's line, "You don't get to critique survival when all you've ever known is comfort." And pinned it with the caption, "This is what representation sounds like." But it wasn't just left-leaning audiences responding. Conservatives were watching too, and many of them didn't know what to do with what they saw. They couldn't dismiss her as angry, she never raised her voice. Couldn't label her emotional, she never cracked. Couldn't say she dodged the facts, she brought more data than the subcommittee staffers themselves. And most damning of all? She made people feel. That wasn't part of the plan. Karoline's media team scrambled to contain the damage. Within hours, they'd released a statement framing the exchange as a passionate discussion between 2 public servants who care deeply about our country's future. The internet wasn't buying it. Comments flooded in. Passionate? She cut her off 7 times. You didn't get owned. You got documented. Crockett showed up with stories and stats. You brought snark and slogans. By sundown, Jasmine had received over 5,000 new emails through her public inbox. Not spam. Not bots. Real people. Teachers. Single parents. Veterans. Even a pastor from Karoline's home district who wrote, "I don't agree with you politically, but what you said today was truth." Full stop. Still, Jasmine wasn't celebrating. She was on a late-night call with her staff, eyes red from scanning letters, voice low but focused. "We're not chasing views," she said. "We're chasing results." Her aide, Devon, pulled up a spreadsheet. Housing appropriation votes next month. Think this gives us momentum? Jasmine nodded. It gives us visibility. Now we turn that into leverage. Back in D.C., Karoline sat with her comms director, rewatching the clip that had already hit 4.3 million views. The silence in the room was brutal. Her staffer finally said, "We could counter with a policy thread. Talk about urban mismanagement." Karoline didn't respond. Because she knew. That wasn't the battle anymore. Jasmine hadn't made her look bad. She made the system look exposed. And when that happens, no soundbite can fix it. 3 days later, Jasmine Crockett walked into a packed community hall in Oak Cliff, South Dallas. No press. No podium. Just folding chairs, a mic on a stand, and over 200 people, some wearing shirts with her name, some just curious, all watching the woman who had made the entire political world stop and listen. A young mother stood first. "Do they really listen to you like that up there?" she asked, arms crossed but eyes hopeful. Jasmine didn't sugarcoat it. "Not always," she said, pausing. "But last week, I made sure they heard you." The room nodded. That was what mattered. Not the views. Not the retweets. The recognition. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt had retreated to friendly ground, conservative media. She appeared on a podcast titled Uncensored with Cody Marks. Her tone was defensive, careful. "Look, it was a tense hearing," she said. "I don't apologize for asking tough questions." But she never mentioned the interruptions. Never acknowledged the photo Jasmine had held up. Never addressed the silence that followed it. Because you can't debate someone who brings the room with her. Back in Dallas, Jasmine met with housing advocates. "The clip is fire," one of them joked, holding up a phone. Jasmine smiled, but gently waved it away. "We're not done," she said. "Virality fades. Leases don't." By that weekend, The Atlantic published a piece titled, "Crockett and the Power of Composure." It traced the shift in public perception, not just of Jasmine, but of how truth sounds when it doesn't perform. The author wrote, "In a room where she was interrupted 7 times, Jasmine Crockett built an unshakable silence. And made the interruption itself the indictment." But perhaps the most striking ripple came quietly. In Portsmouth, Ohio, a retired coal worker named Rick sent a handwritten letter to Jasmine's office. It read, "I don't know much about Dallas. But I know what it's like to have your roof cave in and no one care. What you said, it hit. Not because it was political. Because it was real. I don't vote your way. But I believe you when you talk. And that's rare." Jasmine kept that letter. Pinned it behind her desk. Because it reminded her that what happened in that hearing wasn't just a moment, it was a mirror. A mirror that showed what politics could look like when someone stops talking for applause and starts speaking for survival. And Karoline? She may have walked in ready to score a point. But Jasmine walked out having changed the score entirely.